Richmond, Virginia, September 17th, 1859. 4:47 a.m. Isaiah pressed his body against the rough planks inside the equipment wagon, barely breathing. Through a gap between the canvas and wood, he watched dawn break over Capitol Square. His wrists ached where the shackles had been removed 3 hours ago. The skin was still raw, still bleeding slightly. He could smell his own sweat mixing with the odor of rope and varnished canvas that surrounded him. Somewhere above, Professor Thaddeus Blackburn was checking the balloon's inflation valves. Isaiah could hear the hiss of coal gas, the creak of wicker, the low murmur of early arrivals already gathering. He'd memorized the plan, knew every second of timing, knew that if anyone looked inside this wagon before 9:12, he'd be dead by nightfall. 6 days earlier, in a Philadelphia boarding house that smelled of tobacco and old wood, Blackburn had read the letter for the third time. 4 lines, no signature. The package will arrive Tuesday midnight. Stable behind the Exchange Hotel. Bring everything you showed us. This is what you said you believed in. Blackburn's hands had trembled. He'd given a speech at the Anti-Slavery Society 3 months prior, drunk on wine and righteous anger, declaring that any man with courage and a balloon could strike a blow against the institution. Now they were calling his bluff. Now belief required action. The crowd had started arriving before dawn. By 7 o'clock, 3,000 bodies pressed against the rope barriers. Isaiah could hear them through the canvas. Children laughing, women gossiping, men placing bets on how high the balloon would rise. The smell of fried pork and fresh bread drifted from the food vendors setting up along Broad Street. His stomach cramped with hunger. He'd eaten nothing since the night before. At midnight, as instructed, Blackburn had waited in the stable behind the Exchange Hotel. The door opened silently. 2 men in broad hats. Between them, a figure wrapped in a traveling cloak. When they pulled it back, Blackburn saw Isaiah for the first time. Young, maybe 25. Eyes that had witnessed things no human should witness. Wrists ringed with scars where iron had worn through flesh for years. "This is Isaiah," one man whispered. "Colonel Harrington's property, 3 plantations in Goochland County. He's been studying navigation by the stars for 2 years. Knows which way is north. Question is whether you know what you're risking." Blackburn had looked at those scarred wrists, at the coiled tension in Isaiah's body, at the fierce, unbreakable determination in his eyes. "I know," he'd said. Now, at 8:30 a.m., the balloon dominated Capitol Square. 37 feet of crimson and gold silk, swelling with 23,000 cubic feet of coal gas. The gondola hung below, reinforced with ash wood ribs. Blackburn had designed it to carry 400 pounds beyond his own weight, for exactly this purpose, for exactly this moment. Mayor Mayo approached with Governor Wise and 3 councilmen. "Professor Blackburn, spectacular, simply spectacular." The mayor's voice boomed across the square. "The governor himself has come to witness your achievement." Blackburn forced a smile, his throat dry as chalk. Somewhere in that crowd was the slave patrol captain who'd personally returned 47 runaways. Somewhere was the editor who'd published 3 essays defending slavery as biblically ordained. Somewhere were the very men whose wealth depended on keeping people like Isaiah in chains. The balloon strained against its mooring ropes. The crowd roared approval. Children pointed at the sky. Society ladies opened their parasols against the climbing sun. A photographer was setting up his equipment, preparing to capture this moment for posterity. No one knew they were about to witness something far more significant than a balloon demonstration. At 9:05, church bells began ringing across Richmond. St. Paul's Episcopal, First Baptist, St. John's where Patrick Henry had given his liberty or death speech. The bells rang out over a city built on tobacco and human bondage, over auction houses where men and women stood on blocks to be examined and purchased, over warehouses where enslaved people waited in chains to be shipped south. Isaiah heard the bells through the canvas. His heart hammered against his ribs. In 7 minutes, everything would change, or everything would end. At 9:12, Blackburn dropped his glove, deliberately, theatrically. He climbed halfway out of the gondola to retrieve it, positioning his body to block the crowd's sightline to the wagon. His assistant rushed forward to help. In that 3-second window, Isaiah moved, fast, silent, from wagon to gondola, dropping into the hidden compartment beneath the passenger deck. The hatch closed above him, the lock engaged. He could hear the crowd's continued applause, unaware that history had just occurred 15 feet in front of them. Blackburn climbed back into the gondola, holding his retrieved glove, waving to wild cheers. Beneath him, in darkness barely 2 feet high, Isaiah lay perfectly still. He could feel every vibration through the wicker, could hear Blackburn's breathing above, could smell the coal gas that would carry them both toward freedom or death. At 9:15, the mayor gave the final signal. The last mooring rope was released. The balloon lifted. For 3 seconds, no one noticed anything wrong. The crowd cheered. The photographer captured the moment. Governor Wise applauded politely. Then someone in the crowd pointed, shouted. Others looked, saw something that couldn't be. The equipment wagon's canvas had shifted in the morning breeze. Beneath it, clearly visible, was an empty space where something, or someone, had been hidden. And there, on the ground beside the wagon, was a pair of iron shackles, still warm, still marked with fresh blood, 800 feet above Richmond. 9:17 a.m. Isaiah could barely breathe in the hidden compartment. The air was thick with coal gas and his own terror. Through the narrow gap between the floorboards, he watched the ground recede. First the faces of the crowd, then the rooftops of Capitol Square, then the entire city spreading out like a map beneath him. He'd never been this high, never imagined the world could look so small. Above him, Blackburn's boots shifted against the wicker floor. Isaiah heard the professor's breathing, rapid, shallow, panicked. They were supposed to wait until they cleared the city limits before opening the hatch. The plan required patience, invisibility, but something had gone wrong. Even from 800 feet up, Isaiah could hear the commotion below. Shouting, screaming, the sound of 3,000 people realizing they'd been deceived. "They know," Blackburn whispered. His voice trembled. "God help us, they know." Down in Capitol Square, the slave patrol captain named Morrison had pushed through the crowd to the equipment wagon. He'd seen the shifted canvas first, then the empty space, then the shackles lying in the dirt, still marked with fresh blood. For 3 full seconds, his mind refused to process what his eyes were showing him. Then understanding hit like a physical blow. "The balloon!" Morrison's voice cut through the crowd's confusion. "There's a runaway in the balloon!" The crowd's cheers transformed into shocked silence, then into something uglier. Rage, betrayal, 3,000 witnesses to a crime that challenged everything they believed about control, about property, about the natural order of their world. Governor Wise grabbed Mayor Mayo's arm. "Get men to the militia armory, now. If that balloon comes down anywhere in Virginia, I want that aeronaut arrested and that property returned." He didn't say slave, didn't say man, property. That's what Isaiah was in the eyes of Virginia law. The photographer, still standing beside his camera, had captured the moment of liftoff. In his developed plate, taken seconds before discovery, you could see the balloon rising majestically. You could see the crowd applauding. You could see, if you looked closely at the bottom right corner, a pair of iron shackles lying in the dirt. This photograph would never be published. The photographer would be paid $50 to destroy the plate, but he would keep it hidden in his studio for 40 years, a secret testimony to what he'd witnessed. At 900 feet, the balloon caught a stronger wind current. Isaiah felt the gondola lurch violently. His head struck the compartment ceiling. Blood ran down his forehead, mixing with sweat. The space was barely 18 inches high. His legs were cramping. His lungs burned from the coal gas seeping through the floorboards, but he didn't make a sound, couldn't risk it. Not yet. Blackburn was checking his compass with shaking hands. The wind was carrying them northeast at approximately 12 knots. Good. That was good. Pennsylvania was north. Freedom was north. But Virginia stretched for 200 miles in that direction. 200 miles of slave patrols, militia companies, and men with rifles who'd been taught their entire lives that runaway property must be recovered at any cost. Below them, Richmond exploded into coordinated chaos. Church bells began ringing, not in celebration now, but in alarm, the signal that a slave had escaped. Within minutes, every plantation owner within 20 miles would know. Within an hour, mounted patrols would be spreading across the countryside, watching every field, every road, every possible landing site. Colonel Harrington, owner of 3 plantations in Goochland County, was having breakfast when his overseer burst into the dining room. "Sir, it's Isaiah. He's escaped, in a balloon, over Richmond." Harrington set down his coffee cup with absolute precision. His hand didn't shake. His voice remained calm. "Prepare my horse. Send riders to every plantation between here and the Potomac. I want $500 offered for information leading to recovery. Dead or alive." The overseer hesitated. "Sir, 500 is... I don't care what it costs." Harrington's voice was ice. "That boy knows how to read, knows how to write, knows navigation and mathematics. He's been teaching the others. If he reaches the north, if he tells his story, do you understand what that does to everything we've built here?" At 200 feet, Blackburn finally opened the hatch. Isaiah pulled himself up through the opening, gasping for clean air. The first thing he saw was sky. Endless, impossibly blue sky stretching in every direction. The second thing he saw was Blackburn's face, pale and terrified. "They saw the shackles," Blackburn said. "The whole city knows. Every patrol in Virginia will be hunting us." Isaiah stood slowly, gripping the gondola's rim. His legs were shaking. His head was bleeding. But his eyes were clear and focused. He looked down at Richmond, at the city where he'd been sold twice, whipped 17 times, and told every day that he was worth less than the tobacco in the warehouses. From up here, it looked insignificant, fragile, almost beautiful in its smallness. "How long until we cross into free territory?" Isaiah's voice was steady. "If the wind holds, maybe 6 hours to Maryland, another 3 to Pennsylvania." "Can we make it?" Blackburn looked at his altimeter, his fuel gauges, his compass. They were burning coal gas faster than he'd calculated. The balloon wasn't designed for this distance. The wind could shift. The gas could fail. 1,000 things could go wrong. "I don't know," he admitted. Isaiah wiped blood from his forehead and studied the landscape below. Rolling farmland, rivers snaking through valleys, roads like thin veins connecting plantations where hundreds of people lived and died in bondage. He'd memorized every constellation, every navigation principle he could learn from stolen books. He'd planned this escape for 2 years, mapping wind patterns, studying geography, teaching himself mathematics by candlelight in the slave quarters when everyone else was sleeping. "That way," Isaiah pointed northeast. "Follow the Rappahannock River. It leads toward Fredericksburg. After that, we need to aim for the Potomac. Can you do that?" Blackburn stared at him. "You know the geography?" "I know every river between here and Freedom." At 400 feet, they heard the first rifle shot. Distant, almost insignificant from this height, but unmistakable. Someone was shooting at the balloon. Below them, on a farm outside Richmond, a plantation overseer named Dutch had grabbed his hunting rifle and was taking aim at the crimson and gold silk envelope floating overhead. He fired 3 times. The bullets passed harmlessly beneath the gondola, but the message was clear. This escape would not go unchallenged. Blackburn checked the balloon's integrity. No visible damage. They were too high for accurate rifle fire. But as they drifted over the countryside, Isaiah could see people gathering in fields, pointing upward, watching their progress. Some were running toward barns to saddle horses. Others were signaling to neighboring farms. An entire surveillance network was tracking them, marking their path, predicting their landing site. "They're following us," Isaiah said quietly. "I know." At 1,600 feet, Isaiah felt something shift in the gondola, a subtle change in balance. He looked down and saw water pooling near his feet. The storage barrel, meant to carry ballast water for controlled descent, had cracked during the violent lurch earlier. Water was draining through gaps in the wicker floor. "Professor, we're losing ballast." Blackburn saw it immediately, understood the implications. Without ballast, they couldn't control their descent. When the gas eventually cooled and the balloon started to drop, they'd have no way to slow it. They'd crash. "How much have we lost?" Isaiah checked. "Maybe 20 pounds. Still losing more." The wind was getting stronger. They were being pushed northeast faster now. 15, maybe 16 knots. Good for distance, but bad for control. Below them, the landscape was changing. They'd cleared Richmond's immediate surroundings and were now over rural farmland. Every 10 minutes they passed over another plantation. Big houses surrounded by slave quarters, tobacco fields stretching to the horizon, people stopping their work to stare at the balloon floating overhead. At 1,800 feet, they passed over a church. Isaiah looked down and saw a congregation pouring out of the building, drawn by the balloon's shadow passing over their roof. Among them were enslaved people, forced to attend their owners' religious services. They were looking up at the balloon, looking at Isaiah standing visible in the gondola, looking at proof that escape was possible. One woman raised her hand, not waving, just raising it, a gesture of acknowledgement, of hope. Isaiah raised his hand in return. Blackburn saw the exchange. "How many people do you think can see us right now?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands." Isaiah's voice was quiet. "Every slave in Virginia is going to hear about this by tomorrow." That was the real danger. Not just one man's escape, but what it represented. Proof that the system wasn't absolute, that freedom could be seized, even in the most impossible circumstances. That defiance was possible. At 9:43 a.m., they crossed over Hanover County, 26 miles from Richmond. The balloon was holding steady at 1,800 feet. The wind continued northeast. They'd been in the air for 28 minutes. Below them, Colonel Harrington was riding hard with 12 mounted men. They'd been tracking the balloon's path, calculating trajectories, positioning themselves for when it eventually came down. Harrington had sent advance riders to Fredericksburg and Port Royal. He'd sent messages to every militia captain in the region. A net was being drawn across Virginia, tightening with every passing minute. At 2,000 feet, Isaiah noticed something that made his blood freeze. The silk envelope was developing a small tear near the top panel. Just a rip, barely 3 inches long. But it was growing. Every fluctuation in wind pressure, every strain on the fabric, made it slightly larger. "Professor, the envelope. I see it." They both knew what it meant. Gas was escaping faster now. The balloon would start losing altitude sooner than calculated. They wouldn't make Pennsylvania, might not even make Maryland. They'd come down somewhere in Virginia, surrounded by men who wanted Isaiah dead or in chains. Blackburn's hands were shaking as he checked his calculations. "We have maybe 2 hours before we start dropping. 3 at most." Isaiah looked at the tear growing slowly in the silk, looked at the water still draining from the cracked ballast barrel, looked down at Virginia stretching endlessly below them. He'd escaped the ground, but he was still trapped, still hunted, still a long way from free. "What do we do?" Blackburn asked. Isaiah was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his shirt and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a knife he'd stolen from the plantation kitchen 3 months ago. The blade was only 4 inches long, but it was sharp. He'd kept it hidden against his skin for 96 days, waiting for the right moment to use it. "If we crash in Virginia," Isaiah said quietly, "I'm not going back in chains." Blackburn stared at the knife, understanding what Isaiah meant, understanding the choice he was willing to make. "It won't come to that," Blackburn said, though his voice held no conviction. At 2,100 feet they heard another sound, different from rifle fire, deeper, more ominous, the boom of a cannon. Below them, the Hanover County militia had wheeled out their 12-pound field gun. They were preparing to shoot down the balloon. The cannon fired at 9:47 a.m. Isaiah heard the explosion first, a deep, earth-shaking boom that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then he saw the smoke rising from a field 2,000 feet below. The 12-pound ball passed 40 feet beneath the gondola, close enough that he felt the displacement of air, heard the whistle of iron cutting through sky. They're shooting at us. Blackburn's voice had gone beyond fear into something resembling shock. They're actually shooting at us. Isaiah gripped the gondola rim. His knuckles were white. Below them, the militia crew was already reloading. He could see men moving in coordinated patterns around the field gun, swabbing the barrel, measuring powder, preparing the next shot. They had the range now. The next ball would be closer. "Can we go higher?" Isaiah asked. Blackburn checked the altimeter. "We're losing gas from the tear. If we vent ballast to climb, we won't have enough control for landing. We'll crash. If we don't climb, they'll hit us." The second shot came before they could decide. This time the ball passed only 20 feet from the gondola, close enough that Isaiah saw it. A dark blur of iron against blue sky, spinning, deadly. The silk envelope shuddered from the air pressure. Blackburn made his choice. He grabbed the ballast release valve and pulled. Water poured from the barrel, creating a shimmering curtain as it fell 2,000 feet to the earth below. The balloon lurched upward, 2,200 feet, 2,300 feet, 2,400 feet. Below them, the militia crew watched the balloon rise out of effective range. The cannon captain cursed. They'd lost their chance, but the damage was done. The balloon was climbing too fast, burning through its remaining gas, hemorrhaging control with every foot of altitude gained. At 2,500 feet, Isaiah noticed something that made his chest tighten. The tear in the silk envelope had grown. It was now nearly 18 inches long, and gas was escaping in a visible stream. The balloon was dying. Slowly, inevitably, dying. "How long?" Isaiah asked. Blackburn was doing calculations in his head, checking gauges, measuring wind speed. "Maybe 90 minutes before we start dropping. Could be less." He looked at Isaiah. "We're not going to make Pennsylvania. Probably not even Maryland. We'll come down somewhere in Virginia." Isaiah said nothing. He reached into his shirt and touched the knife hidden there. 4 inches of stolen steel. His last option if capture became inevitable. The landscape below was changing. They'd crossed into Caroline County. The Rappahannock River wound through farmland like a silver ribbon. Every plantation they passed over, people were stopping work to watch the balloon, pointing, running, spreading word of the escape that was happening overhead. In the slave quarters of the Morrison plantation, an elderly woman named Ruth saw the balloon pass directly above. She was 73 years old. She'd been enslaved her entire life. She'd seen children sold away, seen her husband beaten to death, seen hope die over and over again. But when she saw that balloon, saw a black man standing visible in the gondola, floating across Virginia's sky, she began to weep. Not from sorrow, from something she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. At 10:15 a.m., the wind began to shift. Instead of steady northeast, it was becoming erratic. Gusts from different directions made the balloon swing violently. Isaiah had to grip the gondola with both hands to avoid being thrown out. "Storm coming," Blackburn said, pointing west. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, still miles away but moving toward them. "If we get caught in a thunderstorm at this altitude, how bad? Lightning could ignite the gas, or the wind could tear us apart." Blackburn checked his compass, then looked at the approaching storm. "We have maybe 30 minutes before it reaches us." 30 minutes. And they were still deep in Virginia, still surrounded by slave patrols and militia companies, still floating in a dying balloon over a landscape that wanted Isaiah dead or in chains. Below them, Colonel Harrington was coordinating a net of riders across 3 counties. He'd positioned men at every likely landing site along the balloon's projected path. He'd sent riders ahead to Fredericksburg, Port Royal, and Bowling Green. Every road, every river crossing, every open field was being watched. When the balloon came down, and it would come down soon, his property would be recovered. In Harrington's mind, this wasn't just about one escaped slave. It was about maintaining order, about preserving a system that controlled 4 million human beings across the South. If Isaiah reached the North and told his story, a story of self-education, navigation, strategic planning, it would prove what slaveholders could never admit. That enslaved people were capable of genius. That bondage wasn't natural. That resistance was possible. At 2,400 feet, Isaiah looked down and saw something that made his breath catch. The Rappahannock River was curving northeast, exactly as he'd memorized from stolen maps. Beyond it, maybe 20 miles distant, was the Potomac. And beyond the Potomac was Maryland. Maryland was complicated territory. It was a slave state, but it bordered Pennsylvania. The Underground Railroad operated there. If they could just reach the Potomac, if they could land on the northern bank, they'd have a chance. "The river," Isaiah said, pointing. "We need to follow the river. The wind's not taking us that way. Then we make it take us that way." Blackburn stared at him. "That's not how balloons work. We can't steer. You can change altitude. Different altitudes have different winds. I've seen birds do it. They drop low when they need to change direction. If we drop low, we might not have enough gas to climb again. If we don't change direction, we'll land in the middle of Virginia with Colonel Harrington waiting for us." Blackburn looked at the Rappahannock, then at the storm clouds building in the west, then at the tear growing in the silk envelope. Every option was terrible. Every choice led to probable death. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try it." He opened the release valve. The balloon began to descend. 2,200 feet, 2,000 feet, 1,800 feet. At 1,600 feet, they caught a different wind current, stronger, more southerly, pushing them toward the river. "It's working," Isaiah said. They were dropping faster than planned. 1,400 feet, 1,200 feet. The ground was rushing up at them. Blackburn could see individual trees now, could make out people running in fields, pointing at the balloon, shouting to others. At 1,000 feet, rifle fire started again. Multiple shooters this time, scattered across the landscape. Isaiah heard bullets passing nearby, sharp cracks followed by the whistle of lead. One shot tore through the gondola's wicker rim, missing his hand by inches. "We need to climb," Blackburn shouted. But when he tried to release more ballast, he discovered they'd already used it all evading the cannon. There was nothing left to drop, no way to arrest their descent. They were falling, accelerating, the ground coming up terrifyingly fast. Isaiah looked at the Rappahannock River, now less than a mile away. They were going to make it. They were actually going to cross the river. But they were going to crash on the other side. At 800 feet, the storm hit. Wind slammed into the balloon with physical force, sending the gondola spinning. Rain began falling in heavy sheets. Visibility dropped to near zero. Isaiah couldn't see the ground anymore, couldn't see the river, couldn't see anything but gray rain and darker gray clouds. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it felt like a physical blow. Lightning illuminated the clouds from within. The balloon was being thrown around like a toy, swinging wildly, dropping in uncontrolled spurts. Blackburn was holding onto the gondola with both hands, his face white with terror. "We're going to crash. We're going to—" The gondola hit treetops. The impact was violent. Branches tore through wicker. The silk envelope caught on something and ripped further. The balloon jerked to a sudden, wrenching stop, suspended 40 feet above the ground in a stand of oak trees. For several seconds, neither man moved. They were alive. Impossibly, they were alive. Isaiah looked down. They'd crashed in forest. Dense forest. He could hear the Rappahannock nearby, the sound of moving water, which meant they'd crossed it. They were on the northern bank. But where exactly? Still in Virginia? Or had they somehow made it to Maryland? The rain was easing. The storm was passing as quickly as it had arrived. Through the trees, Isaiah could see open ground about 100 yards away, and on that open ground he could see horses, men, armed men, dismounting, running toward the crash site. "They found us," Blackburn whispered. Isaiah pulled out his knife. The blade caught what little light filtered through the storm clouds. He looked at Blackburn, and in his eyes was a promise and a question. "I won't let them take me," Isaiah said quietly. "But I need to know. Will you tell them where I went? Will you tell them what I did?" Before Blackburn could answer, a voice called out from below. Rough, authoritative, Virginia accent. "You in the balloon! Come down! Come down now or we'll shoot you down!" Isaiah looked at the knife in his hand, looked at the men gathering below, looked at Blackburn. Then he did something neither the men below nor Blackburn expected. He jumped. Isaiah fell 40 feet through oak branches. He hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively to absorb the impact. Pain exploded through his left shoulder. Something cracked. Rib. Collarbone. He couldn't tell. He tasted blood. But he was moving before his mind could process the injury, scrambling to his feet, sprinting toward the sound of the river. Behind him, men were shouting. "There! In the trees! He's running!" The forest was dense. Isaiah ducked under low branches, jumped over fallen logs, pushed through undergrowth that tore at his clothes and skin. The knife was still in his hand. He didn't remember grabbing it before he jumped. His body had made that choice for him. The Rappahannock was closer than he'd thought. He burst through the tree line and saw dark water flowing past. The river was maybe 70 feet wide here, swollen from the storm. On the far bank, the southern bank, the Virginia bank, he could see riders gathering, more patrols. They'd been tracking the balloon's path. He looked back. The men from the northern bank were crashing through the forest behind him. He could hear them clearly now. "Cut him off at the water. Don't let him cross." Isaiah didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the river. The current hit him like a physical blow. The water was chest deep, then neck deep, then over his head. His injured shoulder screamed. He couldn't swim properly, could barely keep his head above water. The current was pulling him downstream, away from the men on the northern bank, but also toward the riders on the southern bank. He heard a shot. The bullet hit water 3 feet to his left, then another. The men were firing from both banks now. Isaiah went under. Let the current take him. His lungs burned. Everything hurt. But underwater, he was invisible. He couldn't be shot. He let the river carry him downstream, staying submerged as long as he could, surfacing only when his lungs forced him to gasp for air. When he came up, he was 100 yards downstream from where he'd entered. Both banks were behind him now. He could hear shouting growing distant. The men were running along the banks, trying to keep pace with the current, but they were losing him. Isaiah let the river carry him for another 200 yards before swimming toward the northern bank. His arms felt like lead. His shoulder was useless. He was swallowing water, coughing, barely staying conscious. But he made it to the shallows and crawled onto a muddy bank, collapsing in the reeds. For several minutes, he just lay there, breathing, listening for pursuit, hearing only the river and his own racing heart. He was on the northern bank of the Rappahannock. But was he in Virginia or Maryland? He'd lost track during the storm. Everything looked the same. Forest, river, farms in the distance. He had no map, no compass, no way to know if he'd crossed into free territory or was still in the heart of slave country. Isaiah pulled himself to his feet. His left arm hung useless. Broken collarbone, definitely. Every breath sent sharp pain through his ribs. His clothes were soaked, torn, covered in mud and blood. He still had the knife. That was something. He moved into the forest, staying low, listening for horses or dogs or men. The sun was past noon now. He'd been running for maybe 20 minutes since the crash, which meant the slave patrols had 20 minutes to organize, to position themselves, to prepare for the hunt. After half a mile, Isaiah found a fallen tree with a hollow beneath it. He crawled inside, hidden by roots and undergrowth. He needed to rest, needed to let his body recover enough to keep moving. He wrapped his shirt around his broken collarbone, trying to immobilize it. The pain was extraordinary, but he'd lived with pain his entire life. Pain was familiar. Pain was manageable. What Isaiah couldn't manage was the uncertainty. He could be 5 miles from freedom, or 50. He could be in Maryland, where the Underground Railroad operated, where abolitionists might help him reach Pennsylvania. Or he could still be in Virginia, where every white person was legally required to report him, where slave patrols could kill him on sight, where his very existence as a free man was a crime. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the maps he'd memorized. The Rappahannock flowed northeast. If he followed it far enough, it would reach the Chesapeake Bay. But that was wrong. That would take him further from Pennsylvania, further from real safety. He needed to go north, needed to find the Potomac. That was the real border. That was where Virginia ended and Maryland began. But which way was north? The sun was overhead, giving no directional clue. The forest canopy was too thick to see the sky properly. He had no compass, no stars to navigate by, just instinct and memory and hope. Isaiah waited in the hollow log for an hour, listened to the forest, heard birds returning after the storm, heard squirrels moving through branches, normal sounds, no dogs, no horses, no men. Finally, he moved. He walked carefully through the forest, heading in what he hoped was north. Every step sent pain through his body. His shoulder was swelling. His ribs made breathing difficult. He was leaving a trail, broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, probably blood. But he had no choice. Staying hidden meant capture. Movement was his only chance. After another mile, he found a farm. Small, maybe 50 acres, tobacco fields, a single large house, slave quarters behind it. Isaiah watched from the forest edge, studying the layout. He needed information, needed to know where he was, needed to know which way to run. A woman emerged from the slave quarters. She was carrying water from a well. Isaiah waited until she was alone, then moved closer. "Sister," he whispered from the trees. She froze, didn't turn, didn't drop the bucket, just stood perfectly still. "I need to know where I am," Isaiah continued. "Virginia or Maryland?" The woman's voice was barely audible. "You're the one from the balloon." "Yes." "They're hunting you. Patrols everywhere. $500 reward." "Where am I?" She started walking toward the quarters, speaking without looking back. "Virginia, Caroline County. Maryland border is 8 miles north, but there's patrols on every road. They know you're on foot. They know you're injured." She reached the quarters and turned, finally looking at him. "You won't make it. They'll catch you before nightfall." Isaiah said nothing. The woman studied him for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a church, 3 miles northeast, St. Mary's. Basement has a hidden room. Underground railroad station. Ask for Deacon Mitchell. Tell him Ruth sent you." "Ruth?" "It's what we all call ourselves, when we help runners." She picked up her bucket and walked into the quarters. Then from inside, without showing herself, "Go now, before the overseer comes." Isaiah melted back into the forest. 3 miles northeast, St. Mary's Church, Deacon Mitchell, Ruth. He moved faster now despite the pain. He had a destination, had hope. 8 miles from Maryland, 3 miles from potential help. He could make that. He had to make that. But as he pushed through the undergrowth, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Dogs, distant but unmistakable. The baying of hounds on a scent trail. And they were getting closer. Colonel Harrington had released his tracking dogs. Isaiah looked down at the trail he was leaving. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, blood drops on bark. The dogs would follow it easily, would run him down within the hour. He couldn't outrun hounds, couldn't fight them with a knife and a broken collarbone. He needed to do something the dogs couldn't track. Isaiah ran toward the sound of water. There was a creek somewhere nearby. He could hear it. If he could reach it, could follow it far enough, the water would break his scent trail. It was his only chance. The creek was smaller than he'd hoped, maybe 10 feet wide, shallow, fast-moving over rocks. Isaiah waded in and started upstream, moving as quickly as the current allowed. Every step hurt. The cold water made his broken collarbones scream. But behind him, the dogs were getting louder. He followed the creek for half a mile. The dogs' baying grew distant, then confused. They'd lost the scent at the water's edge. It wouldn't stop them. Their handlers would cast them in circles until they picked up the trail again. But it bought time. Maybe 20 minutes. Maybe less. Isaiah climbed out of the creek on the far side and ran, northeast, toward St. Mary's Church, toward the only hope he had left. After a mile, he saw the church, small, whitewashed wood, a cemetery with old graves, no one visible outside. Isaiah approached cautiously, watching for patrols, for anyone who might report him. The church door was unlocked. He slipped inside. The interior was simple, wooden pews, A plain altar, afternoon light filtering through plain windows. Empty. Silent. "Deacon Mitchell?" Isaiah called quietly. No answer. "Deacon Mitchell. Ruth sent me." A floorboard creaked behind him. Isaiah spun, raising his knife. A man stood there. Old, maybe 70. Black, dressed in simple clothes, a Bible in his hand. He looked at Isaiah, at his torn clothes, his swollen shoulder, the knife in his hand, the desperation in his eyes. "Put the knife down, son," the old man said gently. "Are you Deacon Mitchell?" "I am." "And you're Isaiah?" "From the balloon." The deacon gestured toward the back of the church. "Come, quickly. They'll be searching churches soon." He led Isaiah to a storage room, pulled aside a rug, and revealed a trap door. Beneath it was a small cellar, maybe 6 feet square. Dark, cold, but hidden. "Get in. I'll bring food and water. You'll wait here until nightfall. Then we'll move you north. There's a safe house 12 miles from here, just across the Maryland line." Isaiah looked at the hole in the ground, at the darkness below. It looked like a grave, like the end of everything. "I have to tell you something," the deacon said, "before you go down. They caught your friend, the balloon man, Professor Blackburn. He's in custody. They're taking him to Richmond." Isaiah felt something cold settle in his chest. Is he alive? For now. But they're charging him with slave theft. That's a capital crime in Virginia. Isaiah stood at the edge of the trapdoor, looking down into darkness. Blackburn was captured. The patrols were everywhere. Dogs were hunting him. He was 8 miles from freedom, but might as well have been 800. "The photograph," the deacon said quietly. "The one they took in Capitol Square, before you left. It's already in newspapers across the North. They're calling you the man who flew to freedom. Even if they catch you, even if they kill you, that image is out there. That story is out there. Every slave in Virginia knows what you did." Isaiah looked at the old man, at the trap door, at the church walls that were probably being watched, at the world that wanted him dead or in chains. "Get in," the deacon said, "before they come." Isaiah descended into the darkness. The trapdoor closed above him. He heard the rug being dragged back into place, heard footsteps walking away, heard only silence. He sat in the dark, clutching his knife, listening for dogs or men or the end of everything. His shoulder throbbed. His ribs screamed with every breath. He was 8 miles from freedom, sitting in a hole in the ground beneath a church, waiting to find out if he'd live long enough to see Maryland. Above him, through the church floor, he heard a door open, heard men enter, heard a Virginia accent. "We're searching for a runaway, Colonel Harrington's property. Have you seen anyone unusual?" Deacon Mitchell's voice, calm and steady. "No, sir. No one but the Lord in this house today." Isaiah held his breath in the darkness and waited to see if that was true.